Welcome to Andy Staples on 3, and thank you, Jer, in the chat. Favorite part of my morning commute? Well, we appreciate that. Glad that we can be along for the ride with you guys in the mornings. I'm liking the format. I am becoming a morning person, which is good because as I got to thinking about what was going on with college football playoff, the changes that were being made, not necessarily what's going to happen the next 2 seasons, but what they're talking about for the next whatever after that, I started to get a little cranky. And so if I were not a morning person now, I'd probably have some really nasty things to say. But I am a morning person now, so I'm looking on the bright side. I'm thinking more globally, and I think that's probably good. Andrew in the chat just wants to remind everybody that Oregon will win the Natty in 2024. Well, Andrew, now we know how Oregon's path to said Natty might work. Because the college football playoff, the commissioners who run it, approved a new model that will take effect for this season and next season. What happens after that is not promised. But for this season and next season, there will be 5 automatic bids, 7 at-large bids. And I realize now, after watching social media on Tuesday after this approval got made, we got to do some CFP FAQs because I think there's some people who are still confused. And I forget that, most of us on who follow this show are deep in the weeds of this stuff. And so they've known about this for 2 years. They've known how it's going to work. They understand, okay, the Pac-12 dissolved. That's why they took away 1 automatic bid. But that's not the case for everybody. So we got to talk about that. And if you got questions in the chat, and I see Jamie Myers just threw up a question in the chat, then ask away. So let's take Jamie's question first, and then we'll see what we can do with that. So Jamie says, what happens when an unranked NC State upsets Clemson in the ACC championship? Does an unranked team get a bid? If so, that's crazy. Well, here's the thing. The odds of an unranked team being number 2 in the SEC, in the ACC, because remember, there are no divisions. And at the question you asked, NC State and Clemson, like there's no way that would have happened in the old divisional system because they were in the same division. But there's probably no way that the second place team in the ACC isn't ranked. So that's probably not a question. If Clemson is the best team in the ACC and they lost to NC State is probably one of the best 12 teams. But what you're asking is, do they get an automatic bid? Yes, they do. They get an automatic bid as long as they're one of the 5 highest ranked conference champs. Now, if under a weird situation, in this hypothetical, NC State was somehow like the number 25 team in the country when the CFP did its final ranking, then they probably wouldn't get an automatic bid because the champions of the American and the Sun Belt, or the American and the Mountain West, might get those instead. But for practical purposes, realistically, that NC State team would be ranked fairly high, being the second best team in the ACC, beating Clemson if we're assuming Clemson's the best team in the ACC. Now, would they be ranked high enough to justify being the number 4 team in the playoff, the number 4 seeded team in the playoff? That's another question, but that's probably what they'd be. So let's just break this down. We'll break it down generally, and then if you've got specific questions, then we will talk them. So generally, here's how it'll work. And again, this is for the next 2 seasons. What happens after that, they're going to start talking about today, and who knows where they go from there. But for the next 2 seasons, it's supposed to go like this. So you have 5 automatic bids, 7 at-large bids. The reason they're doing this, they originally were going to do 6 automatic bids and 6 at-larges. The Pac-12 dissolved. And I know there's still the 2-pack out there, but it was impractical to have that 6th automatic bid. So they're going to move to 5. The top 4 seeds must be conference champs. So why did they do this? The reason they did this is to add stakes to their conference championship games because they want their conference championship games to remain valuable television properties. That's why they're doing this. That's why the conference champs get these high seeds. So the SEC championship game, the two teams in the SEC championship game are making the playoff. Like, they're in the top 12. We know that. But having a bye versus having to play a first-round game is a big difference. Having a bye versus having to go on the road for a first-round game is an even bigger difference. So that's why they're doing it this way. So let's talk about how this will work. Practically speaking, unless some league is just incredibly down, and given what we see going into 2024, I don't see it, your top four will be, in some order, Big Ten champ, SEC champ, ACC champ, Big 12 champ. So in some order, that'll be your top four. And if there's an upset in the conference championship game, yeah, that team gets a bye. That is not them trying to reward deserving teams. That is them trying to add drama to the conference championship weekend. And it will. It'll definitely add drama. But that's how that works. So I'm sure your next question is, what about Notre Dame? Notre Dame, and I saw this on social media on Tuesday, as if people had not been paying attention for 2 years. Notre Dame cannot be a top 4 seed. It doesn't play a conference championship game. The highest it can be is number 5. Now, is anybody at Notre Dame complaining about that? No, they are not. Why? Because Notre Dame AD Jack Swarbrick, he's on his way out, but he was involved in the creation of this process. He was one of the 4 people who created this format. And so this was a horse trade by Jack Swarbrick. He trades Notre Dame never getting a top 4 seed for as long as this type of format exists. Notre Dame never has to consider entering a conference in football, because this format, as long as there are this many at-larges, Notre Dame, if they're 10-2, they're in. If they're 10-2 and their schedule is even reasonably difficult, they're going to be in. Jamie, another question. So do automatic bids include the group of 5? Also, yes. One we think. It could be 2. Like Jamie's earlier hypothetical is, if you said the ACC champ or the Big 12 champ or whoever, if they wound up ranked 25th, but the American champ round up ranked 13th and the Sun Belt champ round up ranked 15th, then those 2 would get in because they're ranked higher. They're not codifying it by saying the members of these conferences get the automatic bid. They're just saying highest ranked because they're assuming that the highest ranked will be from the Big Ten, the SEC, the ACC, and the Big 12. Ed in the chat. What happens when a 12th ranked Ohio State team gets left out for Coastal Carolina? Well, that Ohio State team knew how the format worked and should have finished 11th. That's what happens, because you're doing this to keep this a national framework. That's why you have that one automatic bid for the group of 5. You want to keep it a national framework. You want those conferences to feel included. You do not want them to sue you. And that's why that happens. So it could be very interesting. Gil in the chat, I can see 4 teams from both the Big Ten and the SEC getting in. That only leaves 4 spots with 3 remaining conference winners and 1 left. That's true. That's entirely possible. You could have four SEC teams, 4 Big Ten teams. We'll actually talk a little more about that in a second when we talk about what's going to start getting discussed today. Chris in the chat, it's a benefit not to play in the conference championship game and then get a 5 seed, which is basically a bye. Yes and no. It is a benefit if you know you're going to lose the conference championship game. Winning a conference championship game is way better because then you get a bye. Now, you still got to go essentially on the road because it's a neutral site bowl game situation. So it's way better than having to play an extra game. And that's, again, the Notre Dame thing. Notre Dame because they will never play in a conference championship game, Swerberg said, fine, we'll play that extra game in the first round. Just let us in and don't make us join a conference. That's where that comes in. And I think it's a fair swap. And probably when this all got approved, Jack Swerberg's thinking, all right, I have secured Notre Dame's independence for the foreseeable future. I think he probably would have been right had all this stuff not changed again, had all this stuff not been going on in the court system where the whole sports, the way it's financially arranged is going to change. But let's move forward. So again, these changes take effect this season. We're only guaranteed to see this format, and shoot, the way things are going, we're not guaranteed to see it for 2 years. But right now, we're expecting to see this format in 24 and 25. The reason it's just a tweak and not any sort of overhaul or any sort of massive changes is because they're still in the original CFP TV deal, the one that was signed it was signed in 2013 to start in the 2014 season and last through the 2025 season. And so once that ends, everything's on the table, theoretically. The question is, how's it going to change? What will it look like then? And we do not know the answer to that. What we know is that today in Dallas, the commissioners who run the CFP will meet, and there will be proposals. Our friend Ross Dellinger from Yahoo talked to Kirk Schultz, who's the president at Washington State, one of the two-pack, and Kirk told Ross that there is a fear that the Big Ten and the SEC are going to come in and say, we want 3 automatic bids each or 4 automatic bids each going forward starting in 2026. I don't think that's a wise move. If indeed Greg Sankey and Tony Petitti, the two commissioners of the SEC and Big Ten respectively, want this to be a national framework. If they just want to run the sport, yes, fine, do that. But they're going to get a lot of resistance to that. But here's the difference. It doesn't have to be unanimous to make a change. And here's where they can apply pressure. If, say, the Sun Belt says, we don't want to do this, then they will say, then we'll have the playoff without you. If the ACC says we don't want to do this, they will say we can have the playoff without you. And there would be a playoff, and most people would still watch it. The thing you can't have is a playoff without either the Big Ten or the SEC. You cannot have a college football playoff without either of those leagues. So that's where their power comes from. They don't need anybody else. Everybody else needs them. But I don't think if they want this thing to feel fair is probably the wrong word. We just saw what happened to Florida State. Fair isn't really a word we should use in this discussion. But if they want this to seem like they're all in the same boat, they're trying to create a fun, compelling, event to choose a national champion where everybody has a chance, then you don't codify it by saying 3 Big Ten teams and 3 SEC teams are getting in. That would not be the right thing. If you just want to take over, which they might, which they can if they want to, then just do it. Just do it. Rip the Band-Aid off. Say, we're forming the Super League, the Premier League, whatever you want to call it. And just do it. We know you're going to do it anyway. So just do it. Stand up in front of the meeting. Say, we, as the advisory group, have decided we're taking over the sport. There's nothing you can do about it. And just do it. Take the teams you want. If the ACC teams figure out they can buy their way out of the league, the ones that want to leave, let them buy their way out. Take the ones you want. And just do it. Stop farting around. Stop coming up with these Band-Aid fixes when we know the whole thing's going to change anyway. Now, part of the reason they can't just do that is because they don't exactly know how everything's going to be organized in the future, because a lot of that depends on the court system, the National Labor Relations Board, all of that. Like, does football break off because it needs to? Because it needs to collectively bargain with the players? These are all questions that cannot be answered today and may not be able to be answered for a year. So they've got to figure that out. But I don't think trying to Bigfoot everybody else by saying we want 3 or 4 automatic bids, I don't think that helps the cause. If you're trying to create a compelling event, everybody feeling like they have a chance creates more drama. We're about to see what I call the best event in American sports, the NCAA tournament. Now, do we know that the Big Ten and the SEC and the ACC are going to get multiple teams in? Yeah. The Big 12 is going to get it. I mean, the Big 12 might get more than half the league in. So you can do that. You can have years where you dominate the amount of teams in there. But they're not codified in there. There's nothing that says the Big 12 gets 7 teams in to the NCAA tournament. Now, when we talk to James Fletcher next, we'll talk about how the Big 12 cracked the code on the net ranking and how they figured this out to get more teams in. But that's a basketball discussion. This is a football discussion. And you're going to have years, if you did this system for the next 15 years, which I don't think they're going to, but if you did this system for the next 15 years, you would have years where the SEC got 4 or 5 in, where the Big Ten was super strong and got 4 or 5 in. You would have that with the at-larges. But I can understand, because everybody wants to protect their money. It's probably more like the SEC and the Big Ten are going to throw the automatic bid thing out there so that they can then trade it for a larger share of the money, which is a classic negotiating tactic. You say, here's this thing that we don't really think we're going to get anyway, but we're powerful enough and have enough leverage to make it seem quasi-realistic. But if you just give us this other thing that we want that you don't want to give us, we'll take that other thing away. And you don't have to worry about that. So maybe that's what they're doing. Maybe that's how they get a larger share of the money. Because if you're the Big Ten and the SEC, again, they cannot have a college football playoff without you. So if you want more money than the ACC and the Big 12, you can leverage your way into that. They can't have a college football playoff without you. They can have one without the Big 12. They can have one without the ACC. It wouldn't be as fun. It wouldn't be as interesting, but they can do it. But Wednesday, they enter the no bad ideas phase because they start talking about what the next deal looks like. And remember, ESPN and the representatives of the CFP have already agreed in principle on a new TV deal that would extend ESPN's televising of the tournament for another 6 years. But that has to be approved by the other commissioners. It doesn't have to be unanimous like the changes to this format had to be. So we will see what they decide on. It is subject to change because, again, as we talked about earlier this week, we don't know if those teams that want to get out of the ACC are going to be able to get out. If they can, changes the membership to conferences. We don't know what the NLRB is going to decide in terms of whether players can unionize. We don't know what the courts are going to decide in terms of the NCAA's rules regarding NIL. All of this stuff can change and change pretty rapidly, which is why it's crazy that they now have this deadline. They got to get this figured out in the next probably year or so that they can have in 2026 a format that they understand how it works and everybody's good with it. Bleed purple and gold. So an East Carolina fan, you can have a CFP with only the Big Ten and the SEC, but viewership in the CFP will take a huge hit. Disagree. It won't take a huge hit. That's their leverage. 75% of the people that would watch it would still watch it. So if they get 75% of the money, it would make sense. Can't ostracize over half the sport and expect more viewers. You don't expect more, but here's the thing that people don't understand. It's not more than half the sport. The SEC and the Big Ten have more than half the viewers. They have an outsized chunk of the viewership. Much, much bigger than everybody else. This is like when you see those news stories that talk about, 1% of the population controls X percent of the wealth. Well, that percent of the population controls the vast majority of the viewership. So you're not, don't think about it like teams. Don't say, well, they've ostracized 67 teams and therefore 67 out of 133, that percentage, so 50% of the fans are not going to be interested now. That's not how that works. There are a lot more Ohio State fans than East Carolina fans. Like, there might be more Ohio State fans than entire fan bases of the American Conference. So you have to understand the math of this. There cannot be a playoff without the Big Ten or the SEC. There can with the two of them and the two of them alone. But it wouldn't be nearly as fun. So as they enter the no bad ideas phase, guys, go figure it out. We'll probably have a show or two where we throw some ideas at you, just in case you need a few extra. But right now, we got to talk about Game Time. Download that Game Time app. Use the code STAPLES for $20 off your first purchase. The NCAA tournament is coming up, and Game Time is perfect for the NCAA tournament. So you don't know until Selection Sunday whether your team's going to Salt Lake City or Charlotte or Pittsburgh or Omaha or any of the other cities where they're hosting NCAA tournament games. So you go to Game Time on Selection Sunday, figure out, okay, where's my team going? Click on that venue. You see all of the available tickets. You see photos of the arena, very specific photos. This is where you'd be sitting. This is what you'd see from this seat. You click on all-in pricing so you know exactly what you'd be paying. A couple more taps, those tickets are yours. So go to Game Time, download that app, use the code STAPLES for $20 off your first purchase. It's not just sporting events, concerts, comedy shows, you name it. I was wearing my Willie Nelson t-shirt the other day, and a guy stops me in the gas station. He goes, he's playing like 60 miles from here over the weekend. And he was. I missed it. I didn't even know he was touring. So I looked up Willie Nelson on tour. Heck yeah, Willie is still touring. He's going strong. He's playing in the next few months. He's playing in Missouri. He's playing in Texas. He's playing in Wisconsin. So go to Game Time. Got the NCAA tournament, got summer concerts. Now's the time to get those last-minute tickets. Use the code STAPLES for $20 off your first purchase. All right, now it is time to talk to a guy who has seen quite a bit. He's seen a lot of the changes in college football, and he's riding with them. He's figuring them out as he goes too, because his team just entered a new conference last year. He's learning how that works. He's learning how to retain your best players in this new system. Gus Malzahn from UCF, former Auburn coach, former great State of Arkansas high school coach. I feel like that needs to be part of the prominent part of the bio too. As you'll hear in the interview with Gus, that still informs a lot of how he operates and really laid a great foundation for a great career. Because here's the thing, Gus is coming off his first losing season as a head coach. UCF was 6-7. He's really pissed about that. You're going to see that. And I got a feeling that ain't happening again. UCF could be pretty good next year. Let's hear from Gus Malzahn.
Here in Orlando with Gus Malzahn, Big 12 head coach. We were just talking before we started about the league, the Big 12, and how there might be some kind of misconceptions. And you were a guy who worked in the SEC for years and years. You come to the Big 12. What was your first year through it like? What did it feel like?
Yeah, first of all, there's a lot of real teams. And, in the past, there is that misconception that it was a 7-on-7 league. It was anything but that. Teams line up, they try to bloody your nose. It's a real conference. There's no off weeks.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of parity. You have to play good football to win, whether you're at home or on the road. But I was very impressed going through it the first year.
Well, and that's the thing. I've heard you talk in the last few weeks about you did a lot of reflection. 6 and 7 was not up to your standard. And I had not realized. So in high school, as a high school coach and as a college coach, you never had a losing season.
No.
But you look back on this season, the Oklahoma game, the Baylor game, this could have been a different win-loss record. How close do you feel you are to being competitive, near the top of the Big 12?
Yeah, you learn the first year, there's no doubt. And just to be completely honest, we didn't do a great job coaching. Anytime you had that many close losses, we lost a couple close home. You just talked about the Oklahoma. You got a chance to seize a moment in a huge win. We weren't able to do that. But I like where we're at. Definitely did some self-reflection. Never lost. But when you do that, it gives you an opportunity. Okay, hey, what do we need to do? And we evaluate everything. We made some coordinator changes, some staff changes. I really think that's going to help us. We brought in some defensive playmakers, from the portal that I think can help with our young guys that we got coming up. So, I like where we're at, but, we're going to roll our sleeves up and go to work.
So you got here, and you said you were never giving up play calling again. And then before last year, you said, I want to deal with the CEO stuff. But by the end of the season, you're into the play calling again.
Yeah.
How did you how did you figure that when you're doing that evaluation? Okay, I need to get back into this.
No doubt. In fairness, I think the last year and a half, 2 years, college football has changed so much.
Yeah.
And just from a head coach's standpoint, there's so much on the head coach now with the one-time transfer, the portal, the NIL, fundraising, everything that goes with it. And so from your common sense standpoint, especially at a place like this, we're a young school, and I got to also be a fundraiser. And so that was the thinking. But by halfway through, as a head coach, I'm always going to do what's best for our team to be successful. And I took back over, and I'm going to do it. And the bottom line is that's what I love to do. That's what I like to do. You adjust. And I think every head coach right now is going through some adjustment with the new age of college football.
Well, and it's interesting. I'll go with two guys that you've worked with in the past. So Eli Drinkwitz gave it up and seems like he was pretty happy with that, with how it worked with Kirby Moore. And then Mike Norvell, I can't imagine him ever not calling plays. Like it seems like that's kind of what makes him as a head coach.
Yeah, and I think that's fair to say. First of all, both those guys are excellent play callers.
Yeah.
Some of the best in the country, and it worked for Eli. There's no doubt. I know he still had a good hand on what's going on, but that league. Being a head coach in that league, that's a monster now. Okay, there's a lot more to it than some other leagues. And then, of course, Mike, he's all you could tell as a GA. The dude's brilliant, and he's so calm under pressure, and he's one of the best that's doing it. These days.
Do you ever get a chance to sit back and think about the tree? Because we mentioned Mike, Eli, Rhett Lashley, Cody Burns, who's in the NFL now. Mm-hmm. You've got a pretty good tree going.
Yeah, well, it tells you I'm getting old. Okay, right. But no, I've been real blessed to be in the right situation right time to coach some big time players, and those guys were, you could all tell they were going to make it. They were really good with kids. They're great communicators. They're very smart. They're workers. They're get-or-doners. And so it was really just all of the above. But I'm real proud of those guys. They're doing extremely well. Chip Lindsey, he had a top 5 offense in the country too. So, there's a lot of good things going with our former guys.
So this team now, you mentioned you brought in, quite a few guys from the transfer portal.
Mm-hmm.
I heard you say something in a press conference a few weeks ago that I found very interesting. You said even before you got here, UCF was always a place that was welcoming to transfers, and it seemed like a place where transfers could thrive. How does that work? Is it something that you try to foster in the locker room to bring when the new guys come in, or is it something that has just kind of been here?
I think it's just been here. I mean, we're a young school. I really took over a great foundation. I mean, not just good players they left me, but a good culture. And it's just, for guys coming in, I mean, there's no jealousy. They want to win.
Yeah.
And they're true team guys. And that's really helped us, with the transfers coming in, be successful.
So KJ Jefferson, obviously the biggest name transferred. I remember when he said he was coming to UCF, I thought, okay, if I could design a quarterback for Gus Malzahn offense, that would be Cam Newton. But if we could have one among the normal human beings, KJ is probably it.
Yeah, I'm really excited about KJ. I recruited him out of high school, but Bo Nix was the same age. And obviously we weren't going to take two quarterbacks. And so, I had my eye on him, obviously, being from Arkansas, and all my friends, a lot of my good friends are huge Arkansas fans, KJ Jefferson fans. So when he went in the portal, he was our number one guy. And you're exactly right with what we like to do offensively. It doesn't get any better than his skill set. And I really think that he has the perfect skill set to thrive, in our league and really in our offense.
And KJ likes to run. And you come up, coming off John Rice Plumlee, who also was a great runner as well. But it's interesting because some of those guys that are good runners that have good arms just want to say, well, I just want to throw the ball. I don't really. KJ's never been shy about running it too.
Yeah. No, there's no doubt. But I mean, I think he's Arkansas's all-time leading passer. Yeah. There's been great quarterbacks come through the University of Arkansas. So that says a lot. But he's willing to run. Like, when we were recruiting, Coach, man, whatever I need to do to help us win, I'm going to do. And so, John Rice, he really developed himself into a passer too. So, but he's a really good fit for what we like to do.
And he comes into an offense where the skill guys, you get a lot of old guys back. R.J. Harvey, the 1,400 rushing yards is back. Kobe Hudson, did you think you were going to get him back?
We knew, he had opportunity. There was other people that were coming after him real hard, not just NFL, but other people. Xavier Townsend's a guy that, is really electric, and I really feel like he's ready to take that next step. And we've got some other young receivers that have a chance to be really good, and some good tight ends too, in a really solid offensive line. So we got the pieces of the puzzle for him to come in and be successful.
So you were talking about all the stuff that the head coach has to deal with now. Retention of the guys that are good on your roster.
Yeah.
How does that process work? I mean, is that an everyday process of just making sure they're happy and want to be here? And
I think that's where it starts from a head coach's standpoint. As soon as that season's over, the number one thing I felt like I need to do is try to retain our top players. And, a lot of the guys are being seeked out, and there's no rules anymore. They're getting recruited, and it's specific recruiting. So holding on to our guys, and we did a pretty solid job of that. And but that's where it starts. I made a couple in-home visits to our own players, but that's just a new age of college football, and really that's where it starts for us.
Is that weird? Like when you're in home with a guy who's been in your program for 3 years, how strange is that?
I've done some in the past with the guys that are thinking about going to the NFL and all that, but I've never done with a portal, thinking about going to other schools in the portal. But that's just where everybody's at, and I'm sure I'm not the only head coach in the country doing that.
Now, I've heard you talk about this before. You were a high school coach for a long time before you became a college coach, and you've always said that the skills you learn as a high school coach, whether it's lying in the field, driving the bus, dealing with mom, how does that translate to a lot of the stuff you have to deal with now?
Yeah, high school is about relationships, and it's about adapting. And, in high school, you're going to get, your best players. It may look different from year to year position-wise, so you got to adapt. You got to have a system that is building around the strengths of your best players. That's probably the biggest advantage I have being a former high school coach, not just being a GA and learning one system and you know it like the back of your hand, but they got to fit perfectly into that system. We have an offense that's flexible, that if we have a chance to get a great player, we know how to build around his strengths, and our system's flexible enough to do that. That's one of the best advantages I think I have being a former high school coach.
So I was talking to, this was several years ago, I was doing a story on Mike Norvell, and I called your former O-line coach from Springdale High School, and he was telling me that you had a situation. And I was thinking about this as I was listening to you talk about NIL and the different challenges. And he goes, we lost a kid to the rodeo one time. So like kid coming to your coach, I want to go do rodeo instead of play football. That's probably different than anything you deal with at NIL.
That is different. Springdale, they did rodeo. You had to adapt, okay? And, that was Don Strubing, my former offensive line coach. So when I went to Tulsa, I was going to try to take Rhett with me to be the GA. Well, Rhett was going to get married. So he stayed in Northwest Arkansas. So I said, hey, Don, who do you got? He said, man, Mike Norvell would be a great GA. So that's how that whole thing started.
And so Rhett says there's this meeting at a gas station somewhere in the middle of Arkansas where basically Rhett is handing off your playbook to Mike Norvell and then telling Mike how to deal with you.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. I said, man, Rhett, you got to meet with him. You got to show him exactly how we do it. And so they got together, and Mike hit the ground running.
That is crazy. And okay, so the Eli Drinkwitz story is he was the manager who came along with the head coach of an all-star team?
Yeah. So I was the offense coordinator all-star team, which that was as good as it gets back in the day. And his head coach was a legend, and the head coach got to bring the manager. Yeah. And so there was a sophomore linebacker named Eli Drinkwitz, and so he was my GA or whatever back then. And so we got to know each other, and when he graduated, hey, Coach, can I come volunteer for you at Springdale High School? Sure, man. He made a good impression for me, and so that's how I went down, and I went to college. He moved up, and he was offensive coordinator, and I think in 2009 we needed a GA. And so I made an in-home visit with him and his wife and talked him into coming to Auburn for $12,000 and to be a GA. And he got a chance to help with Cam Newton. The rest is history.
It is unbelievable. But it's funny because Mike tells the story of, you mentioned Don Stribling. Mike shook Don Stribling's hand at a camp once, like waited around so he could shake his hand and say, I'm Mike Norvell, nice to meet you.
Yep.
And if he doesn't do that, he never gets recommended to you.
I don't think
that doesn't happen.
I don't think so. But Mike, he's a smart guy. Yeah. And, that's just the way Mike is. I mean, he always thinks about the little things, but that's exactly. And, Don said, man, I just know this guy is going to be a great coach for you. He'll be just like Rhett and all this. Yeah. It worked out.
Well, and so this staff, you've gotten some guys that you've worked with before. Ted Roof's come to be defensive coordinator. I bumped into him out there. Yeah. The first thing I said to him was Antoine Carter, greatest hustle play in the history of football.
It was.
For those who don't remember, this is the Iron Bowl in 2010. Auburn's on the way to the national title, except they're about to lose to Alabama. Mark Ingram's about to score a touchdown, and Antoine Carter runs the length of the field and knocks the ball out.
And I think we may have been down 24-0 at the time.
I think you were down 21-0. Okay. And it would have been 28, and you would have lost.
It wasn't looking good.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was, Ted, we have experience together. We won a national championship together. We've kept in touch throughout the years, and so it really worked out, and we're real blessed to have
When
it.
you bring Tim Harris back, it seems like it's a group that really knows each other pretty well.
Yeah, Tim Harris, he's a rising star. He was with us the first 2 years. I mean, did a super job. He goes to Miami for a year. Hired him back as a coordinator. He's a former head coach.
Another former high school coach.
Booker T. Washington, #1 team in the country. So we have a lot of former high school coaches that were very, very successful, and Tim, is one of those guys.
Oh, I watched him coach at Booker T. Central game one year where it was more intense than any SEC game I've ever seen. So
yeah, he's used to winning, and he has a true gift with players. He's very, very smart. He knows what we like to do offensively, and he's gonna. We'll do it together. I mean, he's a right-hand man, and I have a lot of confidence in him.
So how do you balance you bring in, quite a bit of transfer. You kind of split the class between transfers and high school. How do you decide how much you want to devote to either one?
Well, first of all, we're committed to build this thing through high schools. I think we signed 19 and 18, and every year you just got to, after the portal opens up, like, what are the immediate needs? And so we will address immediate needs, but I really believe the foundation for us to be able to win a championship starts in the high school. There's great players around here. And when we got here, our whole goal was to keep our top players here, recruit everybody. They may leave, but if they don't like it, we're going to be waiting on them to come back home. And so you're starting to see the plan, really come into place. But the bottom line is we want to build this thing with high school players.
And how much is the move to the Big 12 we've known about for a while, but now that you've played in it for a year, when you're talking to those guys that are in the class of 25, 26, does it change how they consider you, look at you?
100%. Everything has changed. It's really helped, too, that we went through a year and able to have the home games. And there's some real atmospheres with some real teams coming in. And for those recruits to see it and feel it, they all want to play big-time ball.
Yeah.
This is big-time ball now, and that's been a game changer.
Oklahoma State comes in like the hottest team in the country, and you guys have maybe your best game of the year.
Yeah, there's no doubt. We really did, and we've got a really good home schedule again next year, and so everything is trending in the right direction.
So that stadium actually does bounce. What is it like down on the field when it starts to bounce?
I tell you, it is everybody's on top of you. It's a different feel from a coach player standpoint than any place I've been to because they're so close to you.
Yeah.
But you do hear them bouncing. It freaked me out a little bit the first year we're in the locker room and before the game, the doors are shaking like, whoa, what's going on? But now I'm used to it, but it does bounce.
That's a true home field advantage.
That's right.
Gus Malzahn, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Potentially big year for UCF. They bring a lot of guys back. We talked to RJ Harvey and Kobe Hudson. They're running back and receiver. They're the best returning guys at those positions. You're going to see those interviews here in the next days and weeks. And RJ Harvey specifically, 1,400 yards last year on the ground. I think he's going to have a very big year this year. So that's an interesting situation because UCF going into the new Big 12 where everybody is pretty good. Like everybody's pretty close together in that league. I don't know that it's that easy to handicap because I think we're going to probably look at Utah and Kansas State as the favorites, but Oklahoma State, UCF, we'll see if TCU can make a bounce back. There's some really intriguing storylines in that league. Kansas could be that team this year. We now focus on a team that has just left the Big 12, entering the SEC, the Texas Longhorns. Joe Cook from Inside Texas joins us. How are we doing, Joe?
Doing great. Thanks for having me on, Andy.
My pleasure. And so we've been doing these deep dives into different teams. When FanDuel dropped all those win totals on us a couple weeks ago, we thought, okay, let's look at these things. Let's figure out who's going over, who's going under. And Texas, very select group. We just talked to our friend Justin Hopkins from Scoop Duck because Oregon is one of those 10.5 win total teams. Oregon, Ohio State, Georgia, and the Texas Longhorns are the 10.5 win total teams. Those are the ones that people think will win the national championship. So how are the folks in Austin dealing with that level of expectation?
They're as confident as ever. I think there are a lot of people who are probably in Austin, even though they can't do it legally in Texas, they may be trying to figure out ways to bet the over. The two probably toughest games are one is in Dallas at the Cotton Bowl against Oklahoma, your rivalry game. That's always going to be difficult and important. And then the week after, you host Georgia at Darrell K. Royal Texas Memorial Stadium. That's your toughest game, and you get the Bulldogs at home at what's going to be a crazy weekend in Austin between maybe the number one team in the country coming in, Texas potentially being top 5, and then you got the backdrop of the F1 race too. That's going to be a wild one in the capital city, and one that if you haven't gotten a hotel yet, you may be a little out of luck. But there's a lot of confidence, especially when you think about Jim Harbaugh going to the Chargers, Sharon Moore replacing him. That's a brain, that's a football brain that's not in Ann Arbor anymore. And while I really have a lot of respect for Sharon Moore, that national championship team, a lot of their best players are going to the draft. Similar holds true for Texas. They're losing A.D. Mitchell, Xavier Worthy, Jordan Whittington, Jonathan Brooks, the 2 defensive tackles. But they did really well in the portal at wide receiver, getting Isaiah Bond, Silas Bolden, Matthew Golden. Quinn Ewers is back. That's the big one. And this team seems like after 3 straight top 6 recruiting classes in a really good position to go into the SEC on the right foot.
Yeah, and that's the thing. We were talking about this the other day on the show, Joe. It feels like Texas is developing its players considerably better than it had been. You're going to see that in the draft this year. You're going to see it with, Tavondre Sweat will be a great example of that. But next year, you're going to see Kelvin Banks be a highly draftable prospect. We'll see this year with Christian Jones on the offensive line, where he winds up. But it does feel like they've started to take the clay that they get and really create some players that are at elite level by the time they're leaving. And it feels like that's the difference going into the SEC because you've got to deal with Georgia, who does that as well as anybody. You've got to deal with Alabama. You also still have to deal with Oklahoma. And it feels like that sort of changes the math for Texas. That seems to be, to me, the difference between what we've seen so far in the Sarkisian era and the Tom Herman and Charlie Strong eras.
Yeah, I think the two of the guys, the offensive linemen that you named, are the best examples. Christian Jones, granted, he was a 6-year senior, but this was someone who, I think until his junior year of high school, never really played football. He
Played
was a
soccer
player.
Yeah.
He talks about how he's a big Man City fan. Plays offense and defensive line for a school in Houston. I think it was Cy Woods, and they're an option team, or they were really, emphasized running a lot more. So his first pass set was when he showed up at Texas. So and he was on that first Sugar Bowl team, redshirted, made his way all the way to a 6-year player, and was one of the best right tackles, I think, in the country. And then on the opposite side, you have Kelvin Banks, who comes in as a 5-star, flip from Oregon, one of the top offensive tackles, I think, behind his line mate, DJ Campbell, as far as rankings goes. And he's just been everything Texas has expected from a 5-star offensive tackle since he showed up. Started every game at left tackle. I think he was once an Oklahoma State commit, and they asked Mike Gundy about him one time, and he, in his classic Mike Gundy way, goes like, yeah, that guy's going to be here 3 years. So they've been able to not only make use of the 5-stars. I mean, Xavier Worthy was one. I mean, Quinn Ewers has shown development even over his 2 years at Texas. But they're also getting some of the lower-rated guys. I mean, T'Vondre Sweat, another 6-year guy, he was well-respected, but he wasn't thought to be this – he wasn't an Outland Trophy winner coming out of high school. That's not what I think a lot of people thought was going to happen with his career. And now he's, the Outland Trophy unanimous All-American and working his way up draft boards after Senior Bowl and a great season.
So this schedule is interesting because one of the quirks of it is that they're going to Michigan, and that's a huge game. So much fun, to see the burnt orange in the big house. But this was flip-flopped. This is a series that's 24 and 27. This was originally going to be in Austin, but it had to get flip-flopped as part of the deal to get them out of the Big 12 and into the SEC this early. And it does add a little intrigue because, the SEC schedule, they get Georgia at home. They get, their toughest game at home. Florida comes to them. Kentucky comes to them. They do have to go to Texas A&M, and that's its own story that we'll get to in a second. But how big is that at Michigan game in terms of setting the tone for this season?
I think it's big, and one of the things that the Texas athletic department, I mean, Chris Del Conte even said this last week, even if the SEC goes to 9 games, they're not going to shy away from playing other national brands. Now, what your definition of national brands is could be up to interpretation. They have Ohio State going forward on the schedule, I think, in like the late 2020s. Then they got Arizona State, so a little bit different here and there. But they've shown that they're not afraid to schedule big boys. I think when I was in school, they started with Ole Miss, and then that became USC and Notre Dame. It became, Alabama, of course. So
I'm not going to mention BYU. Those games didn't go that well.
But like you said, that'll definitely set the tone, and that'll say a lot about Texas if they are able to, in back-to-back years, go into this, nationally prominent, top-ranked team's house and maybe get away with the win. If they're able to do that, then that 10.5 is starting to look very accomplishable, because you got, the 4 out of conference games with Colorado State, ULM, and UTSA. Those should be wins. Those are all in Austin. UTSA is not, Frank Harris isn't there anymore, and Colorado State's kind of losing some of their top talent. ULM's still in first year, so that's 4-0. If you beat Michigan. Mississippi State, the veer and shoots cause problems for Texas defense, but you get them at home. Oklahoma, it's always going to be crazy. And then Georgia. So that Michigan game could really define what that Georgia game looks like, if it is like a game of, 1 versus 2, 1 versus 3, top 5 matchup, and if it has SEC title game implications no matter what.
Yeah, it is amazing how this, like, you don't notice until you that schedule comes out and you can really look at it. That's one thing I've talked to, people in the Big Ten and the SEC about this year. Like, it feels real now. And it's been since it was 2021. It was SEC Media Days 2021 when we found out that Texas and Oklahoma were going to the SEC. But now it feels super, because Georgia will be coming to Austin. I love that that's the same weekend as the F1 race. Like, that is going to be the hardest. If you're trying to get one of those fancy downtown hotels, you're not getting one now, but you better have shelled out for that quite a while back. But also, let's talk about rivalries and old stuff. Like, I'm not even going to go to A&M yet. They got to go to Arkansas. Mm-hmm. Texas had to go to Arkansas a few years ago. It did not go well for Texas. That is a place where Texas is hated, absolutely hated. So, like, you want a hostile road environment, you're going to get that in Fayetteville.
One of the cool things about Reynolds Razorback Stadium, that's an open air press box, I think. And I haven't been to a lot of those, whether in the Big 12 or throughout all my travels. That may have been the loudest road environment until I got to Bryant-Denny that I've been to. And that's I think 75,000 person stadium. But that 75,000 person stadium was just vitriolic. Like, that place has a hate for Texas, unlike a lot of other schools, even Oklahoma and even Texas A&M. And they put it on the Longhorns that day. That was year 1 of Sark, game 2 of Sark. They were switching quarterbacks. The team just wasn't prepared, and Arkansas was, and they were able to play to the crowd. The fans had fun with the SEC bit, doing the chants and things like that. But you look back at that and think of, oh wow, soft Texas, Sark's not getting it done, can't prepare a team, and now look, we're about to talk about Sarkisian's contract extension and
exactly $10.3 million a year.
Yeah, and now they are a playoff team, and now a couple years later, Sam Pittman is hanging on in Fayetteville because he has a good record since the 2020 season. So the things can change in this sport very quickly. It can change slowly, and Sarkisian's ability to build up the program, they're going to have to need it in Fayetteville, because that, like you said, that place has a lot of hate for Texas. That's the type of environment that can, add a little bit of effort, add maybe a point or two on the spread. But it's part of what makes this SEC move great. Is not only are you keeping your Oklahoma rivalry, one that was a non-conference game for about 80 years, back when Texas was in the Southwest Conference and Oklahoma was in the Big 8. You're getting the Arkansas rivalry, one that I think at least Arkansas definitely wants to maintain. Texas probably does too. And then you're getting the Texas A&M rivalry back after 13 years of just internet chirping.
Let us talk about that, because yes, I always loved kind of refereeing those arguments on the internet where the Texas people are like, we don't play it because of you. And the A&M people are like, we don't play it because of you. And I'm like, you're both just being complete wimps about this. Just play each other. Well, now they're going to play each other. First time since 2011. They're going back to College Station. I can't wait. Joe, what is the vibe among the Texas fans about getting that rivalry back?
I think people just forgot how much fun it really is. I mean, that is a game that you think about the Egg Bowl in Mississippi and just how that whole state comes together for that game. And you think of other, in-state rivalries where similar happens. Texas hasn't had that. And that's not to, diminish playing Texas Tech, playing Baylor, and playing TCU, of course, Southwest Conference rivals. But they aren't Texas A&M. That's been Texas' main in-state rival, and they haven't been able to play. And I think once the build-up for that game starts, once we get to Thanksgiving week and everybody starts to realize that cousin that they, well, I'm going to watch Texas versus Tech. Oh, well, I'm going to watch LSU and A&M, and then they have to kind of go their separate ways, and now they have to talk to each other about it. I think that's when people are really going to start realizing that it's great that this rivalry's back. Texas, of course, when they played in 2011, there's a famous clip. You can see Mike Sherman walking off the field, And then you can see true freshman who I didn't play, Johnny Manziel, wearing, I think, number 15, kind of running off the sideline after Justin Tucker hits that kick. So they never played Johnny Manziel. They haven't been in the newly renovated Kyle Field. They've done some one-offs in baseball, basketball, a bunch of different sports, but they've never done football. And I think that is going to be, if Arkansas was vicious, that A&M crowd on November 30th with 100,000 plus, that place is going to be rocking and rolling in a way that I'm not sure Kyle Field has seen maybe since those Johnny Manziel days.
I'm just imagining Thanksgiving dinners across the state of Texas where, you have mixed families of Texas and A&M fans when they break into the liquor cabinet that Thursday. Like let's say they're watching the Cowboys and they break into the liquor cabinet and they start talking about that game on Saturday. Whew, it's going to be so much fun. And we have not, I've wanted to focus so much on the new stuff. I mean, the Texas-Oklahoma game last year was a classic. It didn't go the way Texas wanted to, but it was everything you could dream of in a Red River rivalry game. And I feel like people are just sort of shunting Oklahoma to the side. Like, I would imagine if you're Steve Sarkisian and his staff, that there's no way they let these guys take Oklahoma less seriously, because it seems like that was a game that, if like K-State had gone differently last year, that Oklahoma game would have ruined it for them.
Yeah, no doubt. There was a lot of turnovers. I think Quinn Ewers threw a couple interceptions. One was definitely his fault. One was kind of off a deflection, off of Jatavian Sanders. And then, of course, there was that goal line stand, that Texas couldn't punch it into the end zone, and that ended up being the difference in the game. Sark's 1-2 against Oklahoma, and both of his losses are kind of heartbreakers off big comebacks by the Sooners. And for all the praise that he's gotten in Austin, there are diehards who are like, you're still 1-2 versus Oklahoma. And that's something that needs to be fixed. 49-0 is a great one for that one to be, but Texas expects to play and beat its rivals. And that's one that Sark hasn't topped yet. So I think that it's going to be a very interesting matchup, just because you have a Texas program with quarterback coming back, coaches coming back, head coaches coming back. You have a very talented Oklahoma program with Jackson Arnold stepping up, new offensive coordinators, new defensive coordinator, but we know Brent Venables is still running that defensive operation. And of course, the backdrop of the SEC. It's going to be funny to see at the Cotton Bowl, they always have the burnt orange Big 12 logo, and then the crimson one. That's going to be an SEC logo now. And that's going to be an SEC rivalry there at the Cotton Bowl instead of a Big 12 or even Big 8 Southwest Conference one.
They have to sell deep fried SEC logos at the fair. I think that would be a big hit. So I can't let you leave, Joe, without asking the obligatory Arch question, because listen, I picked Washington in the Sugar Bowl in part because of Quinn Ewers, because he's been inconsistent over the years. You just mentioned him in the Oklahoma game last year. So he's also been very good at times, and he's entering year 3 as a starter at Texas, but he's also had situations where injuries have caused him to miss games in both of his seasons as a starter. So Arch Manning is there. By all accounts, he is everything he was advertised to be as a recruit. How does that dynamic work between Quinn Ewers and Arch going into this season?
Steve Sarkisian at the second signing day conference was asked about this, kind of Arch's progress and where things fit, but he was pretty clear about saying, no, Quinn's the starter. And Quinn, if you can't always take a lot from social media, but if you go to Texas social media and look, they're featuring Quinn as if he's the leader. This is his program, face of the program type thing. But of course, Arch Manning's Arch Manning. He's going to draw a lot of attention. There's that the famous picture from the Sugar Bowl media day that lacks some context, but it still says a lot, where you see Quinn looking in the background and there's a huddle basically around Arch. But with Malik Murphy transferring out, going to Duke, I think that does make things a lot clearer. If there were 3 quarterbacks in this position group again entering spring, that's a tough situation for Steve Sarkisian to handle. It's tough for anybody to handle. It's a challenge. It's one that they love taking on, but it's still a challenge nonetheless. With Quinn and Arch, Quinn's going to be the starter. He's going to be the number one guy. Arch is going to be the backup, obviously. And I think everybody can kind of see that, like you mentioned, Quinn has missed games. One was because Dallas Turner landed on top of him. The other was because he had a bad bump against U of H, and that's what brought Murphy in for a couple games during the season. So if you're Arch, not only are you kind of thinking, okay, my redshirt sophomore year, I'm going to be able to take control of this. You don't want to go in because of an injury, but the track record's a track record, and Quinn Ewers has missed 5 games in the past 2 seasons. So you know that there's probably an opportunity. I think it was really great for Sark to be able to get Arch some snaps, not only against Texas Tech, where they ran real offense, but also against Oklahoma State. Just getting him those snaps, I think, kind of shows everybody that it wasn't emphasis on redshirt year, because I think if it's redshirt year, you're like, okay, 4 games, that's it. Doesn't have to play. It was development year. It could have been a few. It came down to it. Maybe it was more than 4, but the key was development year. A year for him to learn how to play college, because for as talented as he is, Isidore Newman to Texas football, even in practice, is a bit of a step up, and that's true for every 5-star number 1 overall prospect that you come across. But he was able to not only get some great development in practice, but get some game opportunity. And looks like if anything happens to Quinn, or if the situation allows for it, thanks on a margin, the margin of the game, Arch is going to be able to play. And I think that's a big deal as far as also having his feet wet to a certain extent and not having to go into the SEC with a first-year starting quarterback, even if he is a Manning. So for Sark, it's a good situation. All expectations are Quinn's going to have a good year, head on to the 2025 NFL draft, and the keys will be turned over to Arch Manning. But we're still a year away from that, and until then, Quinn Ewers is the starting quarterback for the Longhorns.
Yeah, and it's interesting because now in this era, you rarely have a clearly delineated, this is the starter, this is the backup. You've actually had some snaps for your backup. So this is about as good as it's going to get in this era of college football for Sark and for those guys. So and I would imagine the Manning family probably a little more measured and reserved about all of this than the average, QB family.
They know how this goes. They've experienced it a couple times, so they understand the process. And I think everybody looks at the way things with Peyton and Eli. It's like, oh, they waited till their junior year or whatever year it was. And while that's true, that's 25 years ago. So even if
Peyton didn't wait. Peyton got thrown in pretty quick. So
right, Eli had to wait until like his sophomore bowl game, right, or something like that. So I mean, still 25 years ago, different era. Even if it is the same family, you have to kind of live in the era you're in and not just looking at what the family's done in the past, even though that's a factor. And the fact that Steve Sarkisian in Texas, even though it did, I don't want to say cost them Malik Murphy, but even though Malik Murphy exited the program, someone who's still extremely well respected at Texas, and I think you could see from Sark not being able to keep him on board for the playoff game that he was a little bit not distraught, but upset about that, just at the whole way that the sport is. But Texas is in probably as good a quarterback situation as any other team in the country. And considering the way they've recruited, with Trey Owens becoming a 4-star and KJ Lacey in the fold in the 2025 class, it looks like it's going to be that way for the foreseeable future in Austin.
Yeah, the Murphy thing, you can't keep 3 starter level quarterbacks. That's just greedy. So he'll be at Duke. And I bet he'll play pretty well at Duke. So, Joe, thank you so much. That was fun. Again, every time we do one of these things, I get more excited for this season because I'm looking at the idea of Texas going into the Big House, Georgia showing up in Austin. I mean, it's awesome. Joe, thank you so much.
Absolutely, thank you.
That is Joe Cook from Inside Texas. And if you're a Texas fan and you're not already subscribed to Inside Texas, what are you even doing? The best Texas coverage is at Inside Texas. part of the On3 network, of course. And well, this has been fun. We've learned a lot today. I don't know that we've learned much about the college football playoff, what is going to happen going forward, because that meeting has to take place. People have to argue a little bit. We'll be talking more about that tomorrow. Also, we are scheduled to get a visit from West Virginia coach Neil Brown, sticking in the Big 12 a little bit. I want to talk to him about, they had the sideline to on the field communication during the bowl game. And it sounds like that's going to get approved. And the era of all those stupid signs and holding up bed sheets and Connor Stallions might be over. So I want to talk to him about that, and also just about how they turn things around at West Virginia and figure out how to retain guys on their roster, because they're bringing back a pretty good team this year. Also, tomorrow is a Dear Andy show. So I've already gotten a few questions from you that are fantastic, but I know you're going to have more, especially with all these college football playoff changes and potential changes in the air. So hit me up, Andy_Staples on Twitter and on Instagram, AndyStaplesOn3@gmail.com. If you would like to email a longer question, or if you want to, turn the camera on yourself and be marginally internet famous as you ask your question on video. And thank you, Katie, in the chat. Great show. Loved hearing Gus on the show. And if you like the show, by all means, please give us a thumbs up. Please hit the like button. Please subscribe if you're not already subscribed to the On3 Sports YouTube channel, or if you're listening in podcast form, please subscribe on your podcast platform of choice. We do love doing this show every day, and you just let us know how you feel about it in the chat, in the comments. You got suggestions? We love those. You got questions? We love those too. So join us tomorrow for a Dear Andy show. Your questions will drive the show. We'll talk to you tomorrow.